They laughed when the human entered the prison. A thin body, shackled hands, bruised face, no armor, no weapons, no rank, just another fragile Earth specimen. But by the time the prison alarms started screaming, half the galaxy's most dangerous criminals were already dead. They laughed when the human entered the prison because compared to every other creature inside that massive alien facility, he looked completely harmless and weak. And the sound of that laughter echoed through the cold metallic corridors as the transport doors opened and heavy magnetic chains guided him forward under the watch of armed guards who did not even activate maximum restraints since they believed there was no need for extra security against someone so physically unimpressive. He was thinner than most alien species. His skin carried visible bruises from capture, and there were no cybernetic enhancements on his body, no armor plating under his skin, no visible weapons, nothing that suggested danger, and around him stood beings who had conquered worlds. Generals who had commanded planetary invasions, assassins who had ended entire bloodlines, and gladiators whose strength could tear reinforced steel apart with their bare hands. Yet in the center of that terrifying collection of monsters stood a human who looked tired, silent, and insignificant. The prison itself had a reputation across the galaxy as an unbreakable facility located in a distant star system where escape was impossible and rebellion had never succeeded. Protected by layered shield systems, automated defense turrets, surveillance drones that never slept, and guards trained to respond without hesitation. And the warden who controlled the prison believed deeply in order maintained through fear and strict discipline. So when he reviewed the human's file and saw only a simple code marked H-217 with no extraordinary combat statistics or genetic upgrades listed, he dismissed him instantly as another fragile representative of a defeated species. The inmates inside the cells began mocking him loudly because humans were known for relying on machines rather than natural physical strength, and one massive alien gladiator laughed openly and said the human would not survive even 2 rotation cycles. While a venom-blood assassin ignored him completely because he did not consider him worthy of attention, and a telepathic war criminal briefly reached into the human's mind expecting to find fear, but encountered only controlled silence, which he misunderstood as weakness. The guards escorted the human to the lowest security block reserved for prisoners considered too unimportant to place near high-value threats, and the heavy door sealed behind him with a metallic echo that symbolized isolation and humiliation. Yet while the laughter continued, and the guards walked away confident in their control, the human slowly lifted his head and began observing everything with careful precision. His breathing was steady and controlled not because he was broken, but because he was disciplined, and he counted the number of guards in the corridor, measured the timing between surveillance drone passes, memorized the sound pattern of automatic doors opening and closing, and noted which guards appeared careless and which followed strict protocol. Because in a structure built on routine, every pattern could become a weakness if studied long enough. He realized that physical strength ruled the prison's visible hierarchy, but psychological influence ruled its stability. And instead of reacting to insults or showing fear, he chose silence, because silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates doubt, and doubt spreads faster than violence inside closed systems. He paid attention to inmate interactions, observed rivalries forming beneath the surface, and noticed that even the strongest creatures displayed insecurity when challenged indirectly. And he understood something simple yet powerful that many species ignored. Strength without awareness is predictable, and predictable systems can be dismantled. As he sat quietly in his cell, he listened to subtle vibrations in the walls indicating maintenance cycles, recognized slight communication delays during guard shift transitions, and realized that even the most advanced prison relied on structured repetition that could be mapped and eventually exploited. The aliens saw only a fragile body placed among predators, but what they failed to recognize was a trained mind specialized in psychological strategy and patience. And before a single alarm would ever sound or a single fight would erupt, the weakest human in that prison had already begun transforming observation into control. Because in a place where intimidation and brute force defined authority, no one expected the most dangerous weapon to be a calm mind that understood how to wait. During the first days inside the prison, the human spoke almost nothing because speaking too early would draw attention, and attention creates resistance. So instead, he focused entirely on learning the system around him with careful patience and quiet discipline, understanding that before any change can happen, full awareness must exist, and he studied the prison as if it were a living organism with habits and weaknesses. He noticed that guard rotations changed every 6 hours, but during shift transitions, communication systems briefly reset, creating a small delay in response time that most beings would ignore, but which he recognized as a future opportunity. And he observed that surveillance drones followed fixed aerial paths that repeated precisely every 15 minutes, meaning blind spots were predictable if timed correctly. He paid attention to lighting fluctuations in Block D, where aging wiring caused momentary dimming at the same time each cycle, and he understood that small technical imperfections often become catalysts for larger disruptions if introduced into unstable environments. Beyond structural observation, he studied social dynamics among inmates because psychology controls behavior more effectively than physical force, and he identified existing rivalries, including tension between a former gladiator commander and a venom blood assassin who once fought on opposite sides of a distant war. And he noticed that the telepathic prisoner trusted no one and isolated himself frequently, creating natural distrust within the block. The human never openly accused anyone or directly manipulated events in obvious ways, but he positioned himself strategically during meal distribution and exercise rotations where casual comments could be overheard, and he spoke simple, ambiguous phrases such as questioning loyalty or mentioning shifting alliances, not as direct claims, but as suggestions that allowed others to fill in gaps with their own fears. He understood that in high-risk environments, individuals already expect betrayal, and all it takes to activate paranoia is a small nudge in the right direction. And once paranoia begins, it multiplies without further effort. The telepath attempted again to scan the human's mind, but encountered layered mental discipline shaped by specialized training designed to resist intrusion. And this experience disturbed him because mental resistance implied experience beyond civilian capability. Yet lacking clear evidence, he dismissed the discomfort. Meanwhile, guards observed increasing tension among inmates, but attributed it to normal prison hostility, unaware that the stability they relied on was slowly weakening not through violence, but through doubt. The human carefully avoided appearing influential or central to any conversation because visible control invites suppression, and instead he allowed others to believe that conflicts formed naturally from existing distrust. While he continued mapping corridors, memorizing emergency response times, and identifying which guards displayed impatience under pressure, he recognized that fear spreads faster than logic, especially in confined spaces where individuals cannot escape confrontation, and he understood that once fear becomes dominant, it overrides structured authority, creating unpredictable reactions that security systems struggle to manage. Each day, he remained calm and passive in appearance, reinforcing the illusion of weakness while quietly shaping the emotional environment around him. And by the end of the first week, subtle changes were visible as inmates watched each other more carefully. Conversations became shorter and more suspicious, and minor misunderstandings escalated more quickly than before. The prison still functioned externally as a secure institution, but internally its psychological foundation had begun cracking, and the human had not lifted a weapon or broken a visible rule, yet his influence was spreading invisibly through observation, patience, and understanding of behavior, proving that in controlled environments the most dangerous force is not strength, but strategic awareness combined with time. The collapse of the prison did not begin with an explosion or a loud rebellion, but with a small and carefully timed misunderstanding that slowly grew into uncontrollable violence. Because the human understood that systems rarely fall from direct attack, and instead collapse when internal trust is damaged beyond repair. On the 8th cycle after his arrival, a minor delay occurred during food distribution to Block C, something that had happened before but never caused serious problems. Yet this time tension was already present due to days of growing suspicion among inmates, and the human had previously ensured that certain prisoners overheard quiet comments from guards about supply shortages and resource prioritization. Comments that sounded harmless but planted doubt about fairness. When rations arrived late, the venom blood assassin immediately assumed that the gladiator had requested additional portions due to his size and status, while the gladiator believed the telepath had manipulated guard decisions for personal advantage. And because distrust had already been growing beneath the surface, neither of them questioned their assumptions logically. Voices were raised across the corridor, insults were exchanged, and other inmates began taking sides based on past grudges rather than facts. And at that exact moment, the lights in Block D flickered briefly due to aging wiring that the human had noticed days earlier, which created the illusion of deliberate sabotage rather than technical malfunction. The gladiator interpreted the flicker as an attempted attack coordinated by the assassin, and the assassin believed the telepath had interfered with electrical systems. And within seconds, physical confrontation replaced verbal conflict. Energy barriers shook under heavy blows, and security alarms activated automatically, summoning armed guards and aerial drones into the corridor. But confusion spread faster than authority could respond because multiple inmates were now fighting simultaneously, each convinced that betrayal had already occurred. The telepath attempted to defend himself mentally, but panic weakened his focus, and the gladiator attacked with full force driven by wounded pride and suspicion, while the assassin retaliated with lethal precision. And within minutes, the structured order that had defined the prison for decades began to fracture visibly. Throughout the chaos, the human remained seated against the back wall of his cell in a position carefully chosen to avoid camera focus and crossfire, and he did not participate physically because he did not need to. The outcome unfolding was already aligned with his predictions. Security drones fired stun blasts that accidentally struck unintended targets, escalating anger further, and guards struggled to separate combatants while maintaining perimeter control, and the situation intensified because no one trusted official commands during a moment when everyone believed hidden alliances were already in motion. By the time heavy suppression protocols were activated, 3 high-threat inmates were severely injured and 2 were dead, including individuals previously considered among the most dangerous beings in the sector, and the psychological impact of their fall was greater than the physical damage itself because strength had failed against suspicion. When order was finally restored, the corridor showed signs of structural damage. Emergency teams moved quickly to secure wounded prisoners, and the warden demanded immediate investigation into what had triggered such sudden violence after years of stability. Surveillance footage was reviewed carefully and revealed no direct involvement from the human, who appeared passive throughout the event, and official reports categorized the riot as spontaneous escalation between unstable personalities. Yet the warden noticed a troubling pattern. Since the arrival of prisoner H-217, tension levels had increased steadily without visible cause. However, without clear evidence, the administration could not justify severe action against him, and instead they chose to tighten general security measures, unaware that increasing control without restoring trust would amplify paranoia further. The first collapse of the prison was not the broken walls or injured inmates, but the shattered confidence in internal stability, because guards now questioned their predictive systems. Inmates doubted alliances completely, and uncertainty replaced certainty in a facility that once relied on rigid control. The human had engineered none of the violence directly, yet through careful observation, subtle influence, and precise timing, he had transformed minor flaws into catalysts for destruction, proving that in environments built on dominance and fear, the smallest seed of doubt can trigger disproportionate consequences. As silence slowly returned to the corridor and emergency lights dimmed back to normal levels, the weakest human in the prison remained physically untouched, mentally alert, and fully aware that the first stage of systemic destabilization had succeeded exactly as intended. After the riot, the warden could no longer ignore the pattern forming inside his prison. And although there was no clear evidence that the human had directly caused the violence, instinct told him that the arrival of prisoner H-217 had shifted the balance of the facility in ways that were not accidental. So he ordered the human transferred immediately to maximum isolation where no other inmate could speak to him. No casual interaction could occur, and every movement would be monitored under controlled conditions. The isolation chamber was designed for extreme containment, built with reinforced alloy walls, independent life support systems, and constant surveillance that operated separately from the main prison network, ensuring that even if riots erupted elsewhere, the chamber would remain secure, and the warden believed that removing the human from general population would eliminate whatever subtle influence he suspected. The human did not resist the transfer and showed no visible frustration when the heavy door sealed behind him, because isolation was not a punishment to someone trained in patience and psychological endurance. And in fact, separation from chaos gave him clearer focus on the next stage of his mission. Rumors about him had already spread across the prison despite physical barriers, and some inmates believed he could predict events before they happened, while others believed he had manipulated stronger beings into destroying themselves, and fear magnified his reputation beyond reality. Turning silence into myth and myth into psychological pressure, wards assigned to monitor isolation spoke quietly among themselves about the strange coincidence of events, and even disciplined officers began questioning how a physically weak species representative could trigger such instability without obvious action, and that doubt traveled upward through command ranks like an infection. Inside the isolation chamber, the human observed new patterns, including security override codes entered during meal delivery, maintenance personnel timing, and subtle differences between emergency protocol and routine procedure. And he understood that moving him had revealed deeper structural layers of the prison that general population never saw, which provided even more valuable information than before. What the warden did not realize was that from the moment of arrival, the human had been transmitting encrypted data hidden within biometric monitoring signals, because advanced human technology allowed small variations in heart rate and neural patterns to encode information that external receivers could decode. And every observation about guard rotations, shield frequency shifts, and structural vulnerabilities had already been sent beyond the prison walls into deep space. Earth had never considered him a captured victim. He had volunteered for insertion as part of a long-term reconnaissance mission designed to test alien containment systems after the recent conflict between humanity and the Coalition, and his official record had been intentionally simplified to appear unimpressive so that enemies would underestimate his purpose. When the warden finally entered the isolation chamber personally accompanied by armed guards, he confronted the human directly and demanded to know whether he had engineered the riot. And the human calmly responded that he had done nothing except observe existing weaknesses, explaining that systems built entirely on fear eventually collapse under their own tension without requiring external force. The warden pressed further, accusing him of manipulation, and the human answered with quiet honesty that manipulation only works when distrust already exists, implying that the prison's stability had always been fragile beneath its appearance of strength. At that exact moment, distant alarms began sounding across the facility, not as a result of internal conflict, but from external sensors detecting incoming ships exiting hyperspace near the prison's coordinates, and emergency defense protocols activated automatically as shield generators increased output to maximum capacity. The warden turned toward the observation screen and saw signatures matching human fleet configurations, and sudden realization struck him with cold clarity because the timing was too precise to be coincidence. The human in isolation spoke calmly and informed him that the prison had provided excellent structural data, including shield harmonics, patrol schedules, and maintenance vulnerabilities, and that his presence had never been about survival but about analysis. Outside the prison, coordinated strikes targeted shield nodes exactly where efficiency had degraded over time, and defense turrets were neutralized using frequency adjustments calculated from the transmitted data, and within minutes the facility that had stood unchallenged for decades began losing structural integrity under strategic assault. The warden understood too late that he had never been containing a defeated enemy, but hosting an embedded operative, and the weakest human in his prison had not required physical strength to dismantle control, because intelligence combined with patience had already ensured victory before the first external shot was fired. As the outer defense shields of the prison flickered and collapsed under precise human strikes, coordinated boarding ships moved into position with disciplined accuracy, and specialized entry teams advanced through previously identified weak points exactly as predicted by the data transmitted from inside, proving that this operation had been planned long before the first riot ever erupted. Explosions were controlled and strategic rather than chaotic, because the objective was not destruction for revenge, but neutralization of strategic infrastructure, and human forces avoided unnecessary casualties while disabling key systems including power relays, communication hubs, and automated turret networks. Inside the isolation chamber, the heavy reinforced door unlocked from external override codes transmitted by the boarding team. And when it opened, the human stepped forward calmly without urgency, because from his perspective the mission had already succeeded the moment structural data reached Earth Command. Armed soldiers in advanced combat suits greeted him with professional acknowledgement rather than emotional celebration, confirming that this was a planned extraction rather than a rescue. And together they moved through corridors where alien guards were surrendering or retreating under coordinated tactical pressure. The warden, now fully aware of the truth, confronted the human one final time in the Central Command corridor and demanded an explanation for risking capture inside one of the most secure facilities in the sector, and the human answered with simple clarity that humans understand sacrifice differently than most species, because physical weakness forced them throughout history to develop intelligence, adaptability, and long-term planning as survival tools. He explained that when humans face stronger enemies, they do not always respond with direct confrontation, but instead gather information, test reactions, and wait patiently for the right moment to act. And that this prison had represented an opportunity to evaluate alien psychological and structural dependence on fear-based authority. The warden argued that no species willingly enters captivity, but the human calmly replied that captivity without loss of purpose is merely positioning, and that true weakness is not physical limitation but failure to adapt. Around them, human strike teams secured remaining resistance points with disciplined efficiency, using non-lethal force when possible to demonstrate controlled superiority rather than uncontrolled aggression, and surviving inmates watched in stunned silence as the system they once feared collapsed without prolonged battle. The gladiator who had mocked the human lay injured but alive under medical containment, and he stared at the human with a new understanding that strength alone had not protected him from manipulation, while other prisoners realized that the being they dismissed as fragile had dismantled their environment without raising a weapon. The human paused briefly before leaving the command sector and addressed the warden with a final statement that would later circulate across multiple star systems, saying that humanity does not claim to be the strongest species in the galaxy and does not deny physical limitations compared to larger or more armored civilizations. But humanity survives because it studies patterns, questions assumptions, and evolves under pressure rather than collapsing beneath it. He explained that underestimation is the greatest strategic advantage available to any civilization, and that by judging humans solely on biological metrics, the alien coalition had ignored psychological resilience and analytical capability, and that the prison's fall would serve as a demonstration rather than a declaration of war. External fleets secured orbital control fully within hours, and once strategic objectives were achieved, human command transmitted a clear message to neighboring systems stating that the operation had targeted infrastructure assessment and would not expand into civilian territories, reinforcing that the purpose had been to prove vulnerability rather than initiate conquest. As evacuation procedures began for secured alien personnel and prisoners, the human operative walked toward the extraction shuttle without dramatic gestures or visible pride, because his role had been one component within a broader strategic framework designed to reshape perception across the galaxy. Behind him, the once invincible prison stood damaged but not annihilated, a symbol transformed from dominance into warning, and intelligence analysts across multiple civilizations would later review the incident and reach the same conclusion. Humanity compensates for physical disadvantage with cognitive discipline and coordinated patience. The weakest human in the prison had never been physically dominant, yet through observation, subtle influence, encrypted communication, and precise timing, he had reshaped an entire strategic environment from inside its core, proving that danger is not defined by appearance, but by intention guided through intelligence. As the shuttle departed and stars shifted into hyperspace streaks, the message carried outward through official channels and whispered rumors alike, reminding every civilization that encounters with humans require caution, not because they are unstoppable warriors, but because they are relentless learners who convert every experience, even captivity, into opportunity. In the end, the truth became undeniable across the sector. The human had not survived the prison because he was lucky, nor had he escaped because of brute force, but because he had entered with purpose, endured with patience, and exited only after ensuring that the balance of power had shifted permanently, and from that day forward the phrase, weakest human, would never again be spoken with laughter, but with careful respect. The destruction of the prison did not end the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning of a much larger change across the galaxy, because power is not measured only by battles won, but by perceptions altered, and what humanity changed that day was perception. In the weeks following the operation, data transmissions about the prison incident spread through diplomatic channels, intelligence networks, and underground information brokers, and every version of the story carried the same unsettling detail. A physically unimpressive human had destabilized one of the most secure alien facilities from inside without using visible force. Civilizations that once dismissed humans as biologically inferior began reviewing their previous assessments, and strategic councils recalculated threat evaluations not based on muscle density or natural weapons, but on cognitive adaptability and psychological endurance. The alien coalition that had previously considered Earth a minor defeated participant in interstellar politics now faced uncomfortable internal debates because their confidence had relied heavily on comparative biological metrics, and those metrics had failed to predict strategic creativity. Analysts studied the timeline carefully and realized that the human operative had never rushed any action, had never revealed intent prematurely, and had allowed the system to weaken itself through controlled emotional pressure before external forces ever arrived, demonstrating a doctrine built on patience rather than aggression. Inside human command structures, the mission was archived not as a heroic rescue, but as a successful reconnaissance and strategic demonstration, because the goal had never been glory but recalibration of galactic assumptions, and the operative who had entered as H-217 returned quietly to debrief without public recognition. During debriefing, he explained in calm detail how alien prisons relied heavily on fear-based hierarchy where strength created order. But distrust destroyed cohesion, and he emphasized that most species underestimated the power of subtle influence because they evolved in environments where physical dominance solved immediate threats, whereas humans evolved in conditions requiring cooperation, planning, and psychological navigation of complex social systems. Military planners incorporated lessons from the mission into future contingency strategies, expanding emphasis on intelligence gathering, adaptive response, and controlled narrative shaping rather than direct confrontation, because humanity understood that survival in a galaxy of larger species required thinking several moves ahead at all times. Meanwhile, the damaged prison was partially restored by the alien coalition, but its symbolic authority was permanently weakened, and inmates transferred to other facilities carried stories about the quiet human who had turned monsters against each other without lifting a weapon, spreading reputation faster than any official statement could suppress. Diplomatic envoys from neutral systems approached Earth with renewed caution, not hostility but careful respect, because unpredictability combined with restraint creates strategic weight, and humanity had demonstrated both. The warden who survived the incident submitted a formal report acknowledging systemic flaws and recommending policy revisions across coalition facilities, indirectly admitting that reliance on intimidation alone created exploitable fractures, and though he never publicly praised the human, his report reflected reluctant recognition of intellectual superiority in that specific context. Across media channels and distant star systems, debates emerged about whether humans were dangerous because of deception or because of adaptability, and some commentators argued that patience itself was the most advanced evolutionary weapon, since it allows weaker organisms to outlast stronger predators by choosing timing carefully. Within Earth society, the mission remained classified, yet internal morale increased subtly because proof existed that humanity could influence galactic structures without matching raw strength, reinforcing a cultural belief that intelligence and endurance were valid forms of power. The operative himself returned to training facilities to instruct future specialists in psychological operations, teaching them that true control requires understanding fear, ego, and expectation, and that being underestimated is not an insult, but a strategic advantage. Over time, the phrase, weakest human, evolved into a quiet reminder within military academies that external appearance rarely reflects internal capability, and recruits were taught that calm observation often achieves more than visible dominance. The galaxy did not suddenly fear humanity with panic. Instead, it regarded them with thoughtful caution, recognizing that any species willing to enter captivity voluntarily for data collection possessed a long-term perspective that could not be measured through physical comparison alone. Trade negotiations shifted tone, security alliances recalibrated, and conflict simulations began, including human behavioral unpredictability as a significant variable, illustrating how a single operation had influenced broader strategic models. In the vast scale of interstellar history, the fall of one prison might seem minor, yet the psychological ripple it created altered diplomatic equations across multiple sectors, and that ripple began with one silent individual choosing patience over pride. The final lesson, carried quietly through military and political circles alike, was simple but profound. Strength can dominate space, but intelligence shapes time, and the species that understands time controls outcomes beyond immediate confrontation. Humanity did not need to conquer worlds to prove capability. It needed only to demonstrate that underestimation carries consequences, and by turning captivity into advantage, the human operative ensured that no civilization would again measure Earth solely by physical standards. Because from that moment forward, the galaxy understood that behind fragile appearance often stands calculated intent, waiting for the precise moment to act. The galaxy made one mistake. They judged humanity by appearance. If you enjoy stories where humans turn weakness into power, subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories. Because in this universe, underestimating humanity is always fatal.